Our town, our TV. Amherst City Cable.
November 24th, regular meeting of Amherst City Council will come to order. Roll call, please.
Mr. Winarski.
Here.
Mr. Miller.
Present.
Mr. Janik.
Here.
Mr. Bukovac.
Here.
Mr. Goodell.
Here.
Mr. Van Churen.
Here.
Mrs. Wasilk. Here.
We'll stand for the prayer by Chaplain Vasilk and remain standing for the Sergeant at Arms. Pledge the flag by Sergeant at Arms Bukovac.
Will you bow with me, please? Gracious God, thank you for the blessings of this past week. Keep your protecting arms over us. We pray a special blessing tonight on our brave soldiers who are representing our nation overseas. Be with them during this week of Thanksgiving. Protect them and bring them back safely to us. Bless them and bless us all. And now may the words of our mouths and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen.
Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Excuse Mr. Ramsey. Mr. Janik.
Motion to excuse Mr. Ramsey as he has a letter on file.
Thank you.
Second.
Mr. Goodell, second. Motion is second on the floor to excuse Mr. Ramsey from tonight's meeting. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? He is excused. We'll move on to item 4, the consent agenda.
Minutes of the regular council meeting held November 10th, 2014. Minutes of the Technology Committee held November 17th, 2014. Minutes of the Finance Committee meeting held November 17th, 2014.
Mr. Goodell.
I'd like to make a motion to accept the consent agenda.
Mr. Miller.
Second, please.
Motion is second on the floor to accept the consent agenda as read. Are there any comments? Roll call vote, please.
Mr. Winarski.
Yes.
Mr. Miller.
Yes.
Mr. Janik.
Yes.
Mr. Bukovac.
Yes.
Mr. Goodell.
Yes.
Mr. Van Churen.
Yes.
Mrs. Wasilk.
Yes.
Completes item 4. We'll move on to item 5, acknowledgement of the public pertaining to items on tonight's agenda. Anyone here wishing to speak on anything that is on tonight's agenda? If not, we'll move on to item 6, ordinances and resolutions. First reading, item A.
An ordinance authorizing the treasurer to enter into a depository agreement with U.S. Bank N.A. for the city's funds and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Goodell.
I'd like to make a motion on item, that we suspend council rules so that item 6A can be passed on its first reading
Thank you.
with the emergency.
Mr. Janik.
Second.
Motion is second on the floor to suspend council rules on item A, so it may be passed on the first reading. Any comments? Roll call vote.
Mr. Winarski.
Yes.
Mr. Miller.
Yes.
Mr. Janik.
Yes.
Mr. Bukovac.
Yes.
Mr. Goodell.
Yes.
Mr. Van Churen.
Yes.
Mrs. Wasilk.
Yes.
Motion carries. Mr. Van Churen.
To adopt.
Mr. Miller.
Second, please.
Motion is second on the floor to adopt. Roll call vote.
Mr. Winarski.
Yes.
Mr. Miller.
Yes.
Mr. Janik.
Yes.
Mr. Bukovac.
Yes.
Mr. Goodell.
Yes.
Mr. Van Churen.
Yes.
Mrs. Wasilk.
Motion carries.
And the ordinance O-14-44.
Item B.
An ordinance authorizing the treasurer to enter into a depository agreement with the Farmers Savings Bank for the city's funds and declaring emergency.
Mr. Janik.
Motion to suspend council rules so that item 6B can be passed on the first reading.
Mr. Miller.
Second, please.
Motion is second on the floor to suspend council rules so item B may be passed on the first reading. Any comments? Roll call vote, please.
Mr. Winarski.
Yes.
Mr. Miller.
Yes.
Mr. Janik.
Yes.
Mr. Bukovac.
Yes.
Mr. Goodell.
Yes.
Mr. Van Churen.
Yes.
Mrs. Wasilk.
Yes.
Motion carries. Mr. Winarski.
Motion to adopt.
Mr. Goodell.
Second.
Motion is second on the floor to adopt. Roll call vote.
Mr. Winarski.
Yes.
Mr. Miller.
Yes.
Mr. Janik.
Yes.
Mr. Bukovac.
Yes.
Mr. Goodell.
Yes.
Mr. Van Churen.
Yes.
Mrs. Wasilk.
Yes.
Motion carries.
We need, was that adopt? Oh, sorry. Ordinance O-14-45.
Thank you. Item C,
An ordinance authorizing the treasurer to enter into a depository agreement with Lorraine National Bank for the city's funds and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Goodell.
I'd like to make a motion to suspend council rules so that item 6C may be passed on its first reading.
Mr. Miller.
Second, please.
Motion is second on the floor to suspend council rules on item C so may be passed on the first reading. Are there any comments? Roll call vote.
Mr. Winarski?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Janik?
Yes.
Mr. Bukovac?
Yes.
Mr. Goodell?
Yes.
Mr. Van Kuren?
Yes.
Mrs. Wasilk?
Motion carries. Mr. Janik.
Motion to adopt.
Mr. Goodell.
Second.
Motion is second on the floor to adopt. Roll call vote.
Mr. Winarski?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Janik?
Yes.
Mr. Bukovac?
Yes.
Mr. Goodell?
Yes.
Mr. Van Kuren?
Yes.
Mrs. Wasilk?
Motion carries.
Ordinance O-14-46.
Move on to item D.
An ordinance reappropriating funds in various accounts and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Goodell.
I'd like to make a motion to suspend council rules so that item 6D may be passed on its first reading.
Mr. Janik.
Second.
Motion is second on the floor to suspend council rules on item D so may be passed on the first reading. Are there any comments or questions? Roll call vote, please.
Mr. Winarski?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Janik?
Yes.
Mr. Bukovac?
Yes.
Mr. Goodell?
Yes.
Mr. Van Kuren?
Yes.
Mrs. Wasilk?
Motion carries. Mr. Miller?
Move to adopt.
Mr. Goodell?
Second.
Motion is second on the floor to adopt. Roll call vote.
Mr. Winarski?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Janik?
Yes.
Mr. Bukovac?
Yes.
Mr. Goodell?
Yes.
Mr. Van Kuren?
Yes.
Mrs. Wasilk?
Motion carries.
It'll be ordinance O-14-47.
Item E.
An ordinance authorizing the mayor to enter into a memorandum of understanding with the Lorraine County Commissioners, committing the city of Amherst to participate in the Lorraine County Wireless Emergency Notification System for a period of 3 years and declaring an emergency.
Ms. Vasil.
Move to suspend the council rule that requires 3 readings so that this can be passed on the first reading.
Thank you. Mr. Goodell.
Second.
Motion is second on the floor to suspend council rules so may be passed. Item E may be passed on the first reading. Are there any comments? Mr. Miller?
Thank you, Mr. President. Just like to thank the mayor and thank our chief of police for putting time and effort into meeting with Tom Kelly and the county emergency management office to bring this to fruition here in the city. And I hope that we can move forward with the city taking on the efforts that were promoted by Councilman Bukovac and myself and others to bring a notification system that is going to be Amherst specific in regards to local emergency and informational information that will bring us to be a more transparent city. With that, I pass the floor back to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else? Motion is second on the floor to suspend council rules on item E so may be passed on the first reading. Roll call vote, please.
Mr. Winarski?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Janik?
Yes.
Mr. Bukovac?
Yes.
Mr. Goodell?
Yes.
Mr. Van Kuren?
Yes.
Mrs. Wasilk?
Yes.
Motion carries. Ms. Vasil.
Move to adopt.
Mr. Janik?
Second.
Motion is second on the floor to adopt. Roll call vote.
Mr. Winarski?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Janik?
Yes.
Mr. Bukovac?
Yes.
Mr. Goodell?
Yes.
Mr. Van Kuren?
Yes.
Mrs. Wasilk?
Thank you. That completes item 6.
And that'll be ordinance
Sorry
O-14-48.
about that. Moving too fast here. That completes item 6. Move on to item 7, ordinances and resolutions second reading. There are none. Item 8, ordinances and resolutions third reading. There are none. Move on to item 9, miscellaneous and acknowledgement of the public. Anyone here wishing to speak on any item? If not, we'll move on to item 10, agenda requests and committee meeting schedules.
I have none, Mr. President.
Thank you. Finance, Ms. Basil.
I have nothing opposed to me, so cancel.
Thank you. Building and Lands, Mr. Winarski?
Nothing at this time, Mr. President.
Thank you. Streets, Mr. Bukovac?
No items, please cancel.
Thank you. Community Development, Mr. Janik?
No items at this time, Mr. President, please cancel.
Thank you. Executive, Mr. Goodell?
Nothing at this time, Mr. President, please cancel.
Thank you. Ordinance, Mr. Miller?
No items, Mr. President, please cancel.
Thank you. Utilities, Mr. Miller?
No items as well, please cancel.
Thank you. Recycle, Mr. Janik?
No items at this time, Mr. President, please
Thank
cancel.
you. Technology, Mr. Bukovac?
No items, please cancel.
Thank you. Police and Fire, Mr. Van Kuren?
Cancel, please, no items, Mr. President.
Thank you. Move on to item 11, reports administration.
Mr. Kukuka?
I want to thank council for your expeditious action for the appropriations. That should carry us for the rest of the year till the interim budget's passed. Also, on a personal note, these last couple days for Rich Pless in my office, Deputy Auditor, we should be finishing up either tomorrow or Wednesday, but he'll be missed. And Gwen Malbar is now up and running, and so if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to her and the report.
Thank you. Mr. Pecora?
No report, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Costello?
Yes, the leaf pickup's going to continue through Wednesday as it was originally scheduled, and weather pending, we'll do our best to get out next week and hit the whole city and pick up the stragglers. So get your leaves out to the street if they're not there. It's your last chance. Thank you. End of report.
I just have one item. I'd like to request council for executive session regarding some personnel matters. End of report, Mr. President.
Thank you. Mr. Goodell?
I'd like to make a motion to go into executive session.
Mr. Van Kuren?
Move to accept the reports of the administration.
Thank you.
Yes.
Mr. Goodell?
Second.
There's a motion and a second on the floor to accept the reports of administration. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Reports are accepted. Now, Mr. Goodell.
Now can I make my motion to
Yes,
go into executive
yes.
session?
Mr. Miller?
Second, please.
Motion and second on the floor to go into executive session to discuss personnel matters. Roll call vote, please, on that.
Mr. Winarski?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Janik?
Yes.
Mr. Bukovac?
Yes.
Mr. Goodell?
Yes.
Mr. Van Kuren?
Yes.
Mrs. Wasilk?
Yes.
Okay, we'll recess into executive session at 7:43.
Do the walk of shame here.
Serving Amherst and Amherst Township, your hometown television station, Amherst City Cable.